today we're with Wendy Blackwood of Healing Path Counseling right here in Conway. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
And it's a great little place right here in Conway. So what are y'all up to over there? What kind of counseling do y'all offer?
Well, I specialize in grief and trauma, but that kind of gets wrapped into a lot of different things as far as anxiety, depression, life transitions. I see clients from, I guess my youngest is 3 and my oldest is, I think, 87. Okay. But my mean population would be, middle-aged. I see a lot of professionals. So I see everything from medical professionals, a lot of first responders, a lot of educators. And then I do see in the rural community, I see ranchers, farmers, that sort of thing.
Right. And that rural community is kind of who we're talking about today and what our whole project's been about. And, one of the things I've kind of noticed, we've had some reporters out talking to these people each month. And, of course, I grew up in Cave City, Arkansas. It's a very rural community. These people are kind of slow to talk if they think you're kind of not from that way of life.
You're an outsider.
Yeah, you're an outsider. But you kind of grew up in farming, right? So
I did.
Share a little bit of that story.
I grew up on a farm in Yell County with my grandparents. My grandparents raised me, and we had poultry was our main product, and then we, of course, had cattle and hogs and a little bit of everything, and lots of gardening, lots of vegetables.
Yeah. So how do you think that kind of background in the rural life, growing up with your grandparents, how has that helped in kind of your counseling ventures?
Well, I definitely think it helps me because I speak their language, and when they talk about having to work on equipment and the stressors of that, and having to go break up pond water so their cattle have something to drink in the winter, all just the daily chores, fixing fence. These are things that I can relate to and that I can talk to them with authority because I did it my whole life. Right. And so that I think that helps them trust me, helps them know that I understand and that I'm not judging them for the way they do it.
Well, and so 2020, 21, 22, it seems like every year we get to call it unprecedented.
Yes.
Each passing year, it's like this is a year like none before. And I think farmers have felt that, most of our podcast, we've talked about crazy markets. Particularly this year, the hay market has been insane. And then there's always the climate. There's COVID. And so one thing we haven't talked about, and we are kind of wrapping up our podcast now, and we're looking into 2023, and it's kind of this idea of anxiety. And so how would you define anxiety as a counseling professional? What is anxiety?
I think the simplest definition is it's excessive worry about what might happen. And it's typically wrapped up in what is going on, but it's excessive to the point where it's disturbing. It interferes with your day-to-day existence. It causes lack of focus. It can cause irritability. A lot of physical symptoms come with it: upset stomach, headaches, sleeplessness. So it really infiltrates a lot of areas. And for farmers and ranchers, it's been an anxiety-provoked several years.
Yeah, absolutely. And so so like I said, last month for several months, we've talked about depression. We've talked about overwhelming, the sense of being overwhelmed. Last month, we actually kind of tackled the idea of suicide among farmers. So how does anxiety separate from depression? I mean, can you suffer from both at the same time?
You absolutely can. Yeah. So when you think of depression is more of those low emotions. It's feeling helpless, hopeless, sad, a lot of the time, more days than not. And it's not just your everyday sadness. It's heavier. It's deeper. Anxiety is that excessive worry, and it's all the what ifs. You can absolutely have it at the same time. And if your anxiety gets high enough, if you're worried enough about finances, about your equipment, about your stock, I'm talking about livestock, then you can get depressed if it feels like there's no end.
Absolutely. And I think for a lot of farmers, I mean, it's so often we talked back during the summer, we kind of made an episode about the summer vacation and for a lot of farmers, right. Yeah. No such thing for farmers. And so, that idea of that endlessness, I think, is perpetual for farmers, So I've read in a few places that anxiety is most common. It's the most common mental illness in America.
It is. And I would say probably worldwide, but in the U.S. for sure. We are a fast-paced society, and we're all the right nows. We want everything right now, and the world doesn't work that way. And oftentimes there's a lot of delays in what can and might happen, and so anxiety and all the what we want and need are sometimes very different things. And so anxiety can really get promoted with a lot of social media. Everything looks shiny and glossy, and the world is not really like that. Right. And there's nonstop. We have access to our phones. We have access to 24-hour newscast. Everything is just bombarding, so there's not a break from it.
Right. Yeah, and I mean, as you were saying that, I was thinking anxiety might be more of an adult. More adults suffer with it, but then you mentioned social media. So I mean, is it across age groups?
Yes, I get children, kindergartners that have anxiety, and a lot of their anxiety is sometimes performance or social, like fitting in. But yeah, it's lifelong. Yeah. It can be lifelong.
So you spoke earlier about anxiety can cause sleeplessness. It can cause headaches. Are there So those are kind of temporary physical, but is there if I suffer from anxiety for 10 years or 15 years, is there a substantial physical toll that this can take on me?
Absolutely. It can cause blood pressure issues, which goes into heart issues, which goes into diabetes, which, there's a lot of different things that can be long lasting. And a lot of physicians, that's some of the first things that they'll ask. If you go to see your physician, they'll often give you an anxiety inventory as soon as you walk in the door. Anxiety, depression. It's become very common because this experience is very common within our world.
Absolutely. And so you mentioned, especially with kids, there's performative anxiety or social anxiety. And then you hear I've even had a couple of panic attacks before in my life. Are these all kind of the same thing? I mean, how are these different things triggered?
They are similar. They're in the same thread. But a panic attack is an overwhelming sense of foreboding, an overwhelming sense of out of controlness. And it often provokes, I have to get out of here right now. It feels like you're going to die if you don't. Something really, really bad is going to happen. And so often that panic, we often don't know what causes it. Sometimes that first panic attack has no connection, and then often that next panic attack is worrying about a panic attack. And oftentimes we will associate those things with people or places, crowds or whatever, but sometimes they can come on in the middle of the night when you're sleeping. And so a panic attack is often very physiological, heart racing, difficulty breathing, pressure in your chest, which is felt in anxiety, but it's much less. And so it feels terrifying.
Right. Absolutely. And so, I mean, I know it's kind of out of your control and it kind of comes up on you out of nowhere. I mean, if I feel myself maybe about to go into a panic attack, or I'm pretty what should I do? What's the steps to take?
Well, I think the first thing is recognizing it, being able to recognize what your body's doing different and how your brain is interpreting it, because your brain is interpreting it as really bad, as danger, when oftentimes it's not danger. And so to be able to take slow, deep breaths, to be able to be very grounded in the here and now, be very present. And if you need to remove yourself from, a crowded situation so you can get some breath, so you can get a glass of water, so you can bring yourself down to the here and now, be very present, very grounded. If someone soothes you, then reach out to that person. But oftentimes it's getting control of it before it becomes a full-blown attack. That's kind of the key.
And also on a day-to-day level, so I mean, you mentioned diabetes. I happen to be diabetic, and I deal with a lot of anxiety. Right? And what's interesting to me is when I'm feeling anxious, and it can be a good anxious of I just accomplished something and got something out of the way, or it can be the bad anxious of I haven't accomplished it or I haven't finished that thing yet. my trigger, or one of the first things that I want to do to soothe myself is reach for that something that I shouldn't eat. So I mean, are there any tips on, like, in that moment of, man, I just want to go get a Debbie cake, a little Debbie? How do I face down that anxiety, that day-to-day kind of?
Well, I think one thing is to recognize that that's your go-to. And the reason it's your go-to is because it releases endorphins. It raises your blood sugar. It releases all kinds of oxytocins, norepinephrine, dopamines, all the good stuff. And so you get a natural soothing sensation from it. Of course, then your blood sugar spikes and then dunks, and it feels worse later. But in the moment, it is effective, but it's not healthy. And so to be able to, in that moment, say, okay, I know what I want, and so I'm gonna back away from it. What else would bring me some sort of soothing? And so it might be a hot cup of coffee that has a little bit of sweetness to it. It might be something crunchy. For me, it's crunchy. I need, and so I have to stay away from the potato chips, so I go to something else. I like carrots. I like things that are crunchy. But going for a walk, a pretty brisk walk, will also raise those different, the oxytocin, the dopamine. Talking to someone you care about, laughter, all these things, and you can seek them out. You could download some comedy videos on your phone. You could download, some different, quotes that are meaningful to you. There's apps that you can put on your phone, calm apps that help you breathe through it. They will give you instructions as you go. So there's many things, but oftentimes it's being near someone, because we get that co-regulation from another person.
Right. I grew up in a small town, and people talked about worrying, and I even remember some ladies that I grew up with. They had their where I come from, they were called their nerve pills.
Yeah.
That's what and I'm sure it was an anti-anxiety medication, and these people lived with this for 40 years, right? I mean, that's just who they were. They were anxious people. So what's at stake for us if we write it off as worry, and we just say, I'm a worry wart and I'm just tied up in knots all the time? What's at stake if we don't take this seriously?
Well, I think if you don't take it seriously, it can shorten your life.
Right.
It can cause issues with your relationships. Oftentimes when people are anxious, they're irritable, or they will shut down, they'll isolate, which means they're not getting any kind of soothing. But if it can be a lifelong health concern, it can shorten your life, because we know that the more anxious we are, the more our heart works, the more our brain, spins in fast measure, and it interferes with everything. It can interfere with the way you're connecting. That can interfere with your work performance, and so then that creates more worry. So it becomes very, very much a repetitive thing if we don't address it.
Well, this is our second to last episode. This is episode 9 of 10. And so is there anything, like I said, I think you're in the unique position of not only being a mental health professional, but coming from that rural background. Is there anything else you'd like to share with our audience about any resources that you might find helpful?
Well, I think the important thing is there's resources all around. A lot of people don't know they're there. Every community has a community mental health office of some sort, every county. And so if you call your local county extension office, or your local, hospital, or even school, they are going to know who the community mental health people are. Whether it's community mental health, whether it's private practice like I do, there's going to be someone out there. If you're overwhelmed by emotions, there's hotlines you can call. For suicide hotline, it's 988. But, you can go to your local physician, because they have become much more in tuned, much more aware that there's certain questions they need to ask and be aware of. The important thing is don't isolate. To just, if you think someone is struggling, ask them. Right. Tell them you see that they're struggling. If you're struggling, reach out to someone. If you don't get the right person, keep reaching out till you do get the right person. There's lots of resources out there, and they're available. And right now, the rural communities are being very targeted. There's lots of resources out there for people that live in those areas.
Right. Yeah, you were actually recently a guest on our program Good Roots here at Arkansas PBS, and you spoke with a veterinary physician about watching the mental health of the farmers that he visits on the farm. I mean, how common is that vets or maybe folks at co-ops are getting kind of an insight into mental health?
I think the veterinarians, I think the people that sell the machinery. I think the people at the co-ops, at the feed store. When I was a kid, we called it going to the feed store. And so I think it's all those people that have those interactions, and they will notice. Now, we get very busy, but sometimes they'll notice this guy's not been around. He doesn't look the same. He's not talking. Oftentimes it's their spouse or their kids that are noticing, and they may mention it to someone. And so the people that have the interactions with the farm and with the farmers are the ones that really, if we can educate them, we can reach a lot more people.
Right. And they, that responsibility of reaching out to a professional may fall on the wife or the kid or the neighbor.
Yeah, or the friend, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining us today.
You're
It was
welcome. Thanks
very
for having me.
enlightening.
Thank you.
If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like, share, and subscribe. Visit arpbs.org for more stories and content like this from Arkansas PBS.